Out there, people, Nick Cicada here, coming in hot with yet another exciting, informative review of a piece of equipment in my arsenal that makes producing content here at Nicholas Studios such an absolute blast. It's been a while since I did one of these type videos where I run down a specific piece of technology. My series Tape Tips hasn't been done for quite some time, so hopefully this will be in somewhat of the same vein. My tape deck is currently in the shop for repairs, so I can't exactly show that off. Although, someday I might open my tape deck up and show you the insides of that. But for today's video, we're not talking about tape-related technology. We're talking about my keyboard here, the Casio MT-68. So stay tuned.
Do you believe in telepathy? Do you believe?
I actually find it somewhat hard to believe that I've never made an extensive video going down all the features of the Casio MT-68. I do kind of consider this instrument a trade secret. It is the sound of Denver New Wave after all, at least in the modern sense, but I think it's in my best interests and your best interests to let you know exactly what to expect if you're in the market for one of these.
John is really gone. He's dropped you
I'm by no means an expert on every sort of keyboard. I'm not a big keyboard head or anything. I don't have a massive collection of keyboards. I did have a keyboard before this, which can be heard on some of my really early work, but it was a crappy toy, and this is much more a professional grade keyboard here. Although, from everything I've heard, it's not exactly top of the line. It falls somewhere in the mid-range of keyboards of the time period. The other interesting thing about the MT-68 is I'm not exactly sure whether it was produced in 1983 or 1984. There are various accounts, and it's not like there's a Wikipedia article for individual models of keyboards, so I'm not sure exactly when the Casio MT-68 was produced. But regardless, I think if you want to be a keyboardist, my advice would be don't get a new keyboard. Don't just go down to Guitar Center and buy a new synth or MIDI or something like that. Get a nice, reliable keyboard or synth from the golden age of synth. I'm talking Depeche Mode, I'm talking, B-52s, I'm talking SSQ particularly. SSQ is classic synth pop. If you want to create synth pop like Paul Hardcastle or whatever, then you want to get a nice, period accurate keyboard and learn the specific chords that compose synth pop or new wave or whatever type genre you're into that floats your boat and is keyboard centric. So, what exactly are the advantages of the Casio MT-68 over a lot of more modern keyboards? Well, one thing is, the Casio MT-68 is insanely durable. This has been with me through rain, snow, falls, collisions, even a car accident. Casio MT-68 lasts through just about anything, provided it doesn't get wet. When I'm taking it out into the snow, if I'm walking to a show and I have to put it in my backpack, I just put one plastic trash bag over this end, tie that up on this end, and then put another plastic trash bag over this end and tie it up on this end. So it's kind of double wrapped, and you can also triple wrap it if it's especially intense rain or anything like that. But I usually find that just wrapping it in plastic keeps it nice and dry. And the plastic casing, of course, protects it from water a great deal. So it's very difficult to get it wet so long as you're careful. That's really the only thing that could possibly damage this keyboard, aside from like a direct collision. The other great advantage of the Casio MT-68, at least from everything I can tell, is it's ridiculously portable. As I said, I just walk around with it in my backpack. It takes up less space than an acoustic guitar. It can be held with one hand, provided your hands are strong, of course, which mine are decently, so you can hold it with one hand, and you can basically treat it like a computer keyboard or something like that. It's a nice, compact design, and there are 4 octaves, so a decent range, not quite as much as a grand piano or anything, but you don't particularly need that. those are two major benefits of the Casio MT-68. Its durability and its portability. This is a really nice keyboard for beginners. If you don't have a big pickup truck, if your car doesn't have enough room in the back seat to house one of those monstrous giant keyboards that are the length of a grand piano, then this is for you. Because this type keyboard has a ton of different features and shit, but it's really small. I didn't even know it was going to be this small when I ordered it. I figured it'd be at least twice this size, but I'm amazed at how durable and portable the Casio MT-68 is. The other advantage, the main advantage, and the reason I really love the Casio MT-68 is because of the built-in speaker right here. This is a major factor in me choosing to get this keyboard because I can play it out on the street. I can play it at parties. I can play it wherever the hell I want. I don't need to hook it up to a sound system. A lot of modern MIDI keyboards, especially the type that I see on sale at Micro Center and the like, they do need to be hooked up to a digital audio workstation or whatever. But the Casio MT-68, from everything I'm aware, is an analog synth. It might be digital. I'm pretty sure it's analog though. So it can play directly out of this speaker. It's not particularly loud, but it is recognizable. It's great for, like, you know, if you're on the street and you want to play a fun little tune or something like that. See, there's a note right there. And you don't need to hook it up to an amp or anything. So for those of you who are anti-electronic instrument because you're like, oh, it needs to be hooked up to a sound system or whatever, I need to buy an amp. You don't. Plenty of electronic instruments have a built-in speaker, and this is one of them. So without further ado, let's get on into the main features of the Casio MT-68. I'm going to readjust the camera and point down on the control panel so you can hear all the differences in sound. The camera might not be the best at picking up how the sound is different, but I'll explain it to you as we go along. So, over here we have the far right of the control panel. This here is the on-off switch. When it's on, that little red light goes on, and when it's off, it's off. One really fascinating feature of the power to this keyboard is if you leave it on for long enough, it actually turns off completely on its own. I didn't even know that older technology can have like a power saving feature, but yeah, if you turn it off and then turn it on and you leave it on for like, I don't know what the exact time is, but like 5 minutes without pressing any key, then it will just turn off. So it saves a lot of battery. You might notice that these have colorful switches on them, but the vibrato and reverb and power don't have the switches. They broke off, but that's entirely cosmetic, and if you get a model, it will probably still have those switches intact. But all I do is just toggle the actual switch. I don't need it to have a fancy plastic cap on it for it to work. Here we have the volume dial, so I'm going to turn it all the way down and then fade in. And this is a really neat feature. I do this on several tracks where I will manually fade a particular key in. And this is very convenient for like a nice atmospheric burst, like you've got total silence and then it just goes. And like that, you can also fade it out. So that's a very neat little manual feature. Sometimes I like doing fade in and fade out manually. Other times I do it in post-editing, but that's a very cool feature to have. It's very basic, of course, but these next two features are anything but basic. This is the selling point for many when it comes to the Casio MT-68. Vibrato and reverb. I usually just go for maximum on both of these because it has a really nice ring to it. But just for an example here, we're going to go over to piano, and I'll play piano without vibrato. So here's what that sounds like. And mid vibrato. And full vibrato. You can hear a little difference there. Somewhat. But what's really noticeable is the reverb. No reverb, and full reverb. So it has a nice lingering effect, and I really like that because obviously a lot of my pieces are very atmospheric. It also makes it so you don't need to play the notes as fast because it'll still sound like there's a sustained note. And no reverb. Nothing lasts. You can also toggle these switches to mid-range, but that's really just for hyper-obsessive people, I guess, who want a little bit of reverb, but not full reverb or something. I usually, like I said, always go full reverb. And that sounds nice. Up ahead, these little two red switches add to the already complex list of features. These are for modulation. As you can see here, there's these two little diagrams that depict what the sound is supposed to do in terms of wavelength, I think. This is modulation 1. So without modulation 1, and again with full vibrato and reverb, they sound a little different without that. But with modulation 1, it kind of tapers in. And with modulation 2, it fades in. So you don't have to use the volume control, you can do this for a fade in. And it's a little different, but here's what it sounds like with both modulation 1 and 2 applied, which you can also do. So that's a very weird science fiction type sound that is pure electronic genius right there. You'd have to be really wacky to go for both modulation 1 and 2, but without, it's just a nice normal piano sound.
Bonnie dreams again and again.
Okay, next up we have the various instruments. Now this is going to be the most relevant to you as you figure out what exactly your sound is. There are 20 instruments in full. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I'll just show you some of my favorites. You can select the instruments by pressing the button of the instrument you want. Like for instance here I want cosmic tone, and then make sure that this button is depressed, because if it's not, then you're going to get funny, which I don't like so much. I'm not even sure what funny is supposed to sound like. It's just supposed to sound funny, I guess. But I like cosmic tone. Now this is the sound of the 80s. If you want a nice synth pop ballad, then cosmic tone is for you. Ooh yeah. Okay, well this here is the electric guitar instrument. This doesn't sound anything like electric guitar. Obviously a keyboard is very bad at replicating the sound of a stringed instrument, but they put it on here nonetheless, and I do use it sometimes. And it's a very bad replica of a stringed instrument. But it's kind of fun and cheesy sometimes, so I've been known to use it. This here is one of my absolute favorites, the harpsichord. Now this has a nice psychedelic rock type sound, so if you're going for a little more 60s vibe, then this is for you. It doesn't sound so good on the low end, but it sounds really nice on the high end, so it's a nice little accent. So yeah, that's the harpsichord. Now these here are the two main buttons that I use all the time. This is piano and electric piano. First, the normal piano. This is supposed to sound like, you know, a grand acoustic piano. Not necessarily a grand piano, but, you know, an acoustic piano. So it's got a nice, intense type sound. then this here is electric piano. There isn't too much of a difference between them, but you can kind of hear it. Again, this is the same note played on electric piano and normal piano. So I think this actually does a pretty good job of replicating the sound of a normal piano. And I often have a difficult time choosing whether to go with normal piano or electric piano, but I kind of like electric piano more. It's mostly just whatever I'm in the mood for. Then we have organ and pipe organ. I really like both of these. These are good for a background type track where you've got a nice drawn out note, because the piano, as you can hear, doesn't last forever if you hold it down. It fades out, provided it has reverb, of course. Whereas the organ will just go on and on and on, and it has this really nice warble to it. You can hear that. And this is pipe organ. So pipe organ, much like harpsichord, is great for psych rock songs because it has a very psychedelic type edge to it. And of course, pipe organs were also popular in the late 1960s. So if you want a more 80s type sound, I would go for cosmic tone and electric piano, maybe electric guitar. And if you want a 60s type sound, or even an early 70s type sound, go for harpsichord, pipe organ, or organ. Any of those will work for you. But this is how it sounds. And that's pipe organ. So yeah, you got two different types of organ, two different types of piano, and you've got cosmic tone, which is a really neat instrument that I don't think any other type brand has or anything. This is a totally unique sound. So if you want to make like a science fiction song or something, or backtrack to your science fiction show about exploring the universe, then this is for you. Very nice little instrument, very nice little sound. Other ones here you can see, I'm not going to play them, but I'll at least show you them. Flute, clarinet, trumpet, horn, oboe, accordion, violin, cello, mandolin, celesta, and harp. And I barely ever use those because they don't sound at all like what they're supposed to. But the last instrument I'll play for you here is the vibraphone. Oftentimes I find that if I'm playing the harpsichord and then I want to play electric piano or pipe organ, I have to really quickly depress the button, but this is what vibraphone sounds like. And I like that sound because it's very pleasant, and it's very different too from the rest of the other sounds. So I like the vibraphone quite a bit. It's a nice percussive quality. So that's a basic rundown of the coolest instruments I think that are available, but you can mess around with all 20 of them if you want. Some of them aren't as good as others.
Feeling this.
Okay, it's time to talk beats. Now this is one of the serious drawbacks of the Casio MT-68, but it is not a drum machine. I've heard from people after I play a particular song that, wow, your keyboard has a built-in drum machine, and it really does not. There are very few beats on here that I actually like. Sometimes on my songs, the studio recordings, I just get a drum fill because the beats are so repetitive and boring, but they're nice for a beginner keyboardist who maybe isn't looking for the craziest time signature or anything, and they can be nice to play along to. They're pretty generic. Here you got the fill-in button, you got a synchro button. I don't really use either of these two very often, but you've got the start and stop feature. So you might start a song without any beat, and then you might introduce the beat, like this. And then introduce the beat. As you can see here, there's 12 beats, and you select them just like you select the instruments with this depress button here. So, depending on whether the button is depressed or not, that's the beat you're going to get. This is the rock beat, and then this is the bossa nova beat. Obviously, I don't play bossa nova, so I never have any need for that beat, but if you do play bossa nova, that's probably for you. And as you can see here, a lot of these beats suck. There's bossa nova, samba, beguine, tango, waltz, slow rock, Latin swing, normal swing, 16-beat, disco, and pops. I like the rock beat, the disco beat, and the 16-beat. The 16-beat has kind of an early hip-hop type feel, but other than that, you're not going to get any fantastic rhythms out of this keyboard. I usually opt for the rock beat because it has a nice shuffle pattern and it's very easy with simple 4-chord structures. But the disco is what I turn on when I'm feeling a little bit adventurous. And then the 16-beat, I usually turn a little slower, so it has a nice reflective quality. So I like the 16-beat a little slower than the other two, but I go for rock, disco, or 16-beat. Barely ever pops, but sometimes I do pops. It's okay, but then you've got like, you know, for instance, like waltz. Like, whoever uses waltz, this isn't even a fun sound to listen to. It just sounds like a construction zone. So again, I'm not sure exactly why all the beats on here suck so much, but I would expect a little better. Like, maybe you can choose, you know, where to put the rhythm in or whatever. Again, that's a drum machine, which this very much isn't. These are just rudimentary beats that you can introduce for a little time signature, a little rhythm keeping. If you have trouble keeping the time yourself, you can add it in. It's basically a glorified metronome. As I said, this is the tempo dial. This controls the speed of the beat. So if you want to go super duper fast, you can go. Wow, it's crazy. That's the fastest. Sounds like a fireworks display. And then you can slow it down too. So there it's basically dead. I usually like to keep the tempo right about here. That's a nice spot, and I make sure it's always there because that's right at the sweet spot, right towards the upper left corner here. Then you've got accompaniment and rhythm. This controls how loud the rhythm is, and this controls how loud the Casio chord is, which we're going to talk about next. So, yeah, let's get on to the Casio chord.
Real hungry for sleep.
So, let's talk Casio chord. The Casio chord here is one of the most interesting but also confusing features on the Casio MT-68, and it's what really sets the Casio MT-68 apart. So, as I said, if you don't like the standard beats that are included, because they're pretty basic, and let's say you're not a very good keyboardist, so you need a bunch of bells and whistles to go on in the background, that's what the Casio chord is for, and it can make a very distinctive sound. Every key left of the F here will trigger the Casio chord on the low end. On the high end, this is where you play the other instruments, like piano or whatever. But on the left, over here, is where you're going to play the Casio chord. So if a song is in, say, the key of C, then you can press the C, and if this switch is, say, in the middle, we've got manual, bass, Casio chord, and arpeggio. So, let's say your song is in the key of C, then this beat will start up, provided one of these beats over here is already playing. Let's turn on the rock beat. It sounds kind of like a children's toy. Sometimes I find the Casio chord a little bit loud, so I kind of like to turn the accompaniment down. There we go. That's a reasonable level. And then you'll play, again, in the key of C. So like... And there you have it. So that's a basic rundown of the Casio chord. The Casio chord will have more crazy shit going on depending on whether these switches are lowered too. You've got the middle here which says fingered. I'm not sure why it says fingered. I doubt that means what you think it means. But for instance, if we start up the rock beat and then we have C here, turn it up a little, then we've got, so we add in a little arpeggio and we add in a little manual bass. And then we hype it up. This is, again, only a feature you would use if you were completely untalented. You couldn't play basic chords on your own, so you just go for this. It might also be neat to rap over if you're like a rapper or something, although it does sound a little juvenile. Now the cool part is, you can specifically change how the beat sounds by choosing, say, disco here. So here we got a nice disco inferno type beat going. It sounds hot, it sounds exciting, it sounds very neat. And you can change the arpeggio. Or the bass. Or the chord. And all of these combinations are absolutely insane. The level of different type beats you can play with these 6 switches alone is completely wild. You will be amazed at the level of different beats you can create here. Although they all do kind of sound like a nursery rhyme storybook or something, which gets kind of annoying after a while. There's 16 beat. So if it's in the key of C, then you would go like... And one thing I should mention also about the Casio chord before we move on is that you can play like a different Casio chord note while you're playing different instrument notes. So for instance, and this is the bass of my song Candle Chrysanthemum. So that's always fun. That's the Casio chord for you. I often find that when I happen on a particular beat I really like, I can't remember how to get it again because using all these switches and shit is kind of like picking a lock. But nonetheless, the Casio chord does have a very unique and distinct sound to it, and I like that because I don't necessarily want my songs to sound like a basic Roland 808 type drum machine, which is just the sound that, you know, Kanye and so many other modern producers use. Even though it is an older instrument, the Casio MT-68 has an entirely different type of unique vintage sound. Okay, so the last thing to cover here on the Casio MT-68 is these things here on the back. This is the power output. So if you don't have 5D batteries, which is what this runs on, and again, like I said, I love how portable the Casio MT-68 is. Oh, it's pressing the keys there. I love how portable it is. So you just open up the battery pack here, and there we go. 5 nice energizers. I try and buy new D batteries as often as possible, especially if I have a big show coming up or something. I restock it with energizers. But if you don't have 5D batteries, then it takes a DC 7.5 volt charger. I used to have one of those. It came with the keyboard, but The cord is very thin, it should be mentioned, so keep it in good shape. Don't yank it too much or anything. But that's for if you don't have batteries and you still want to play. You can absolutely plug this keyboard in. I just like using batteries because even with batteries, it can still be hooked up to an amp and sound absolutely fantastic. But when the batteries run out, eventually it will start to crackle and fizz and kind of wane in the quality of its sound. Here we have line out, and then we have phones. Now, what I've found is that basically every sound system in existence takes this hole, not line out. That might be for actually an RCA type yellow, white, red type cable. But this is where you're going to plug in a 1/4 inch or a 1/4 inch adapter. This is the hole to use when you're hooking up to a sound system. So just remember, it's the furthest left, and from the front it is the furthest right. All the batteries spilled out. If the back of the panel is off, like here, then all the batteries will spill out. So it's very important never to lose the backing. Or you can tape it up, use duct tape, whatever. And the plus side goes towards this end of the keyboard, away from the little control panel on the back here. 5D batteries, and you're basically good to go. That sounds pretty. You're probably wondering what this final little dial here on the back is. I didn't even notice this dial existed for the longest time. But what this dial is in fact, it is the tuning of the keyboard. So you can choose whether or not the keys will sound flat or sharp here. So for instance, here's what it sounds like if it is tuned to one extreme. Then a note will sound like this. And as you turn it, it sounds like this. So hopefully you can tell the difference there. I usually like to keep the dial exactly in the middle, right between flat and sharp, for a happy medium. I don't really like either flat or sharp, and this tuning dial again isn't really like a guitar tuning. You'll be able to recognize a song no matter if a song is tuned to flat or sharp, but I like it right in the middle here. To give you a useful example, here is Let's Get Electric played with one end of the dial tuned, and with the other end of the dial tuned. It sounds like this. Still the same song, but just, you know, a little different pitch. So you can hear the difference, but like I said, I like to keep it right in the middle. You can change it as you like, and you can even make songs that are meant to be in a specific tuning of this style, but I just like it right in the middle. I don't like to mess with it too much. But yeah, a very interesting feature. I'm kind of surprised it's all the way back here instead of on the control panel with all this other wacky shit, but I guess it's just for people who are super sensitive about whether a note is flat or sharp. So that just about covers the full range of wild sounds and ideas you can have with the Casio MT-68. It really is one of the most crazy, diverse instruments it's possible to have. It doesn't even call itself an electronic keyboard. It calls itself an electronic musical instrument, because that's the level of variety you're getting here when you get the Casio MT-68. I honestly cannot recommend this keyboard enough. I absolutely freaking love it, especially over here, how it's got the nice labeling of the notes. So if you've got someone young who you want to teach the keyboard, like a younger sibling or something who maybe doesn't know their scale or can't recognize the notes just by the grouping of 3 and 2 black keys, then you've got it all labeled here but on this side, it's not. And this is also handy, of course, if you use the Casio chord, so you know what key of a song you're playing in, which is very convenient. So there you have it, a complete rundown of the Casio MT-68. I've had this for, 5 years at this point, still going strong, shows no signs of stopping. That's the great thing about vintage equipment, is it's built to last. Fantastic keyboard. As far as price goes, I would say it's about as much as a new keyboard, honestly. It's about $200, I think, is what I paid for it initially. But if you find an old-fashioned keyboard like this at your local thrift store, absolutely do not pass it up. I do know that there are a lot of alternative models that Casio made around roughly the same time with kind of the same gray color scheme, but this is, for my money, the best possible option, the best of both worlds. It has so much variety, so many different sounds, and you can just tell that it's the byproduct of an age when people took synth seriously and really gave a shit about creating the perfect, nice, mellow electric sound. Yeah. So, that's the Casio MT-68 for you. Full breakdown of all its features, maintenance, and everything to do with it. If you have any questions about the Casio MT-68, leave them below. I do know that there have been other videos made on this specific keyboard on YouTube. There are a couple, but I'd say I am a complete expert on this particular keyboard. I've spent so much time learning how to use it, and it is a fascinating piece of equipment. If you want to make new wave or synth pop, you should absolutely get a nice keyboard that has a lot of different features and you can experiment around on it, because you really can't make synth pop without the synth, if you know what I'm saying. So next time you're in the market for an acoustic guitar or even an electric guitar, maybe just consider going with something a little more wacky and a little more fun, like a keyboard. Keyboards are fucking great. I love them. Not necessarily the newer ones. I do find that a lot of the newer ones are built to break, and they have a really tinny, hollow sound. It doesn't sound anything like this magnificent space opera that you can get with the Casio MT-68. But for what it's worth, I think if you go with a nice mid-range vintage keyboard, you don't necessarily need the professional equipment, you don't need the Stevie Wonder type version, just get a nice basic mid-range keyboard from the 80s and you'll be good to go, and you'll be well on the way to becoming a new wave master. Alright, well that's it for this little instructional video. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, then please comment down below your questions, thoughts, or interesting theories about the Casio MT-68, or advice, or anything like that. Until then, I'll see you in the next one. Sayonara, suckers.
Guess after all this